If you enjoy playing e4, but when your opponent plays the Sicilian, you aren't exactly thrilled to deal with all of the incredible complications of the mainline open Sicilian, then you may consider playing an anti-Sicilian. A popular option is the Rossolimo or Moscow variation, depending on how black responds. We reach these variations after the moves e4, taking space in the center, preparing rapid development, and white is now ready to grab more space with d4. Black can discourage this idea by playing c5, turning the game into the Sicilian defense, fighting for control over the d4 square, and creating an immediate imbalance in the pawn structure to promote fighting chances. White continues to develop and centralizes a knight with knight f3. Two of black's most popular responses include d6 and knight c6. In either case, white can play an anti-Sicilian strategy with bishop b5. Let's first take a look at black's popular second move, d6, controlling the center and liberating the light-squared bishop. This move invites a razor-sharp opening such as the Najdorf or Dragon variation if white plays d4, turning the game into an open Sicilian. If white would prefer to avoid these complications, then white can play bishop b5 check. When black plays d6 on the second move, and white responds with this check, we have reached the Moscow variation. White develops with check, trying to keep more control over the position, steering the game toward more positional waters. In response to the Moscow variation, black has 3 reasonable ways to block the check, and all of these moves have been tested at Grandmaster level. Let's take a look at these moves and understand the ideas behind them. One solid response for black is bishop d7. We see a trade of minor pieces with bishop takes d7 check. Since black's knight is more active on c6 rather than d7, black typically recaptures with queen takes d7. In the Moscow variation, we'll see that white often decides between 2 plans, trying to build a strong center with c3 and d4, or else play d4 without the support of c3, often preparing a light-squared bind with c4. Let's take a look at the light-squared bind strategy starting with c4, clamping down on d5 as well as b5, 2 common squares that black likes to use for pawn breaks. Play may continue with the natural developing moves knight c6, centralizing the knight and adding more pressure against white's central d4 square. White continues to develop and support the center with knight c3. White is restricting black's central light squares, but e4 and c4 have weakened the dark squares, especially the d4 square. So black can add pressure to the dark squares with g6, preparing to fianchetto the bishop with bishop g7. White does not want to leave the d2 pawn backward, so it's important to strike in the center immediately with d4. Since black does not want to allow white to maintain such a comfortable space advantage in the center, we see the typical pawn exchange, c takes d4, and knight takes d4. White centralizes the knight to an active square, where it will be placed under serious pressure with bishop g7. White develops a piece and reinforces the knight with bishop e3. Black continues to develop with knight f6, adding pressure against white's center and preparing the disruptive knight g4, attacking white's dark-squared bishop and revealing black's bishop's attack against white's knight on d4. White can respond with f3, supporting e4 and preventing knight g4. After both sides castle the kings to safety, thanks to the pawns on e4 and c4, white enjoys a space advantage in the center, and black would like to break out of this light-squared bind with e6 and d5. An extended maneuvering battle is not uncommon in this type of position, with interesting play likely to follow. Instead of playing for a light-squared bind, white can also prepare to build a strong center with c3 and d4. White can prepare this plan by first castling the king to safety. It's useful to castle the king, as white can then play rook e1, protecting the e4 pawn and preparing c3 and d4. After black plays the sensible developing move knight c6, white supports the central d4 thrust with c3. Although black cannot effectively prevent the plan of d4, as long as black is able to counterattack with the pawn break d5, then the position should remain reasonably balanced. After black continues to develop with knight f6, attacking white's e4 pawn, white can decide to gambit the e-pawn with d4. The point is that after knight takes e4, white can grab space in the center with the tempo gaining d5, attacking black's knight. This creates sharp and interesting positions, with chances for both sides. If white wants to keep the game more positional, then white can play rook e1, protecting the e4 pawn and preparing d4. Black can now prepare the important central counterstrike d5 by playing e6, preparing to meet d4 with c takes d4, c takes d4. White's central pawns look dangerous, especially as white is prepared to take more space in the center, but black is able to counterstrike just in time with the thematic pawn break d5. White is able to take space in the center with e5, but black can turn the threatened knight into an active piece with knight e4. White does have a space advantage, but black's position remains solid, especially as black's active knight on e4 will be prepared to trade itself for white's queenside knight once it develops. Since white does not have a light-squared bishop, black can play moves such as bishop e7 and castle kingside without having to fear an attack on the b1 to h7 diagonal. If black is looking for a fighting game, then a typical choice is to play knight d7. The point is to keep the bishops on the board and try to gain the bishop pair if white plays bishop takes d7. White has two main ways to play this position. One idea is to play d4 immediately, with the idea of soon creating a light-squared bind with c4. The other idea is a typical plan in the anti-Sicilians with bishop b5, playing c3 to prepare d4. After white castles, black can put the question to white's bishop immediately with a6. Rather than giving up the bishop pair with bishop takes d7, white can play the interesting move bishop d3. This move does look a bit awkward, as it currently blocks the d-pawn. The bishop helps protect the central e4 pawn, which almost always comes under attack. And as we'll see, even though the opposite appears true, this move will also help prepare d4. After black responds with the natural developing move knight g to f6, white can add more protection to the center with the useful developing move rook e1. The rook supports the pawn, and at some point, white may even consider an eventual pawn advance e4 to e5. Black can continue to play solidly with e6, controlling the center and preparing bishop e7. White's bishop d3 idea now appears more sensible once white plays c3, opening up the c2 square for white's bishop and helping prepare d4. Typical play can continue with bishop e7 and bishop c2. White is ready to strike in the center with d4, so black can grab space on the queen side with b5. White builds a strong center with d4. There is no need for black to clarify the center for the time being, so black can continue to develop with bishop b7, developing a piece, adding more pressure against white's center, and also opening up the c8 square for a future rook c8, when at some point in the future, black may consider opening up the c-file with c takes d4. Now that white has secured a stable center, the queen side should be developed with knight b to d2. One idea is to maneuver the knight to the king side with knight f1 and knight g3, gaining more control both in the center as well as the king side, followed by developing the dark-squared bishop. Black, on the other hand, will often play queen c7, castle kingside, followed by centralizing the rooks. This position is filled with tension. White does enjoy more space in the center, but black's position is quite solid. Instead of preparing d4 with c3, white can decide to strike in the center immediately with d4. This idea has been tried by no less of a player than world champion Magnus Carlsen. Former world champion Vishwanathan Anand played c takes d4, trading a flank or non-central pawn for white's central d4 pawn. White continues to develop with queen takes d4, centralizing the queen and preparing to create a light-squared bind in the center with c4. Black gained a tempo against white's bishop with a6, which also prepares to support the important pawn thrust b5. Carlsen gave up the bishop pair with bishop takes d7 check, bishop takes d7, with the idea of creating a light-squared bind with c4. If black doesn't play actively, white will enjoy a comfortable space advantage when it isn't easy to find active play for black. Grandmaster Anand understood this well and played the instructive sequence e5, grabbing space in the center and gaining a tempo against the queen at the cost of creating a backward pawn on d6. After white moved the queen to safety with queen d3, white is ready to complete the light-squared bind with knight c3, clamping down on the b5 and d5 squares. But black seizes the opportunity to counterstrike against white's bind with b5. adding pressure against the c4 pawn. After white continued to develop with knight c3, Grandmaster Anand was able to create enough counterplay with b takes c4, queen takes c4, and bishop e6. White enjoys the better pawn structure, but black has the bishop pair and enough activity to balance the game, which eventually was drawn. An interesting hybrid between the Moscow variation, when black plays d6 on the second move, followed by white playing bishop b5, with the Rossolimo variation, which is when black plays knight c6 on the second move, is to respond to bishop b5 check with knight c6. White can play bishop takes c6 immediately, surrendering the bishop pair to compromise black's structure, or else play more flexibly with castling. The idea behind knight c6 is to prepare bishop d7, unpinning the knight and preparing to recapture with the bishop if white captures the knight. One typical line is rook e1. White stabilizes the center and prepares c3 and d4. Black can attack white's bishop and prepare queenside expansion with a6, allowing white to play the interesting move, bishop f1. The bishop escapes danger, making sure not to clog the center, so white can prepare c3 and d4. After the centralizing move, knight f6 and c3, black can decide to pin white's knight with bishop g4, slowing down white's idea of playing d4 and preparing to capture the knight if white plays h3. This is a solid and popular option, but another choice for black is to play e5, taking a fair share of space in the center. White can decide to play d4 immediately, although this does allow bishop g4. This is certainly a playable option for white, but a more cautious approach is to first play h3, preventing bishop g4, so this helps prepare d4. Black can continue to develop with bishop e7, when white strikes in the center with d4. White enjoys a healthy pawn center, but the main point for black is not to panic and feel forced to capture the d4 pawn, as black still has a solid position and can reinforce the center with queen c7 or decide to castle the king. It's true that white can take space with d5, but this releases the tension in the center, so black is not without chances as well. Instead of playing d6, when after bishop b5 check we reach the Moscow variation, black can decide to play knight c6. If white wants to continue with the anti-Sicilian strategy, meaning avoiding the open Sicilian with d4, then white can play bishop b5. We have now entered the Rossolimo variation, which shares some ideas with the Moscow variation we just examined. At this point, black has several options, including d6, transposing into a line we've already looked at, e6, as well as knight f6. We're going to focus on the main line of the Rossolimo, frequently played by world champion Magnus Carlsen as black, g6, preparing to fianchetto the dark-squared bishop on the long diagonal. Just like in the Moscow variation, white can rely on the general plan of castling kingside and playing c3 and d4, with similar ideas to lines we've already examined. Let's focus on another popular structure in the Rossolimo, following bishop takes c6, giving up the bishop pair in order to damage black's pawn structure. Black has two reasonable captures. Let's first take a look at d takes c6, opening up the queen on the d-file, as well as liberating the light-squared bishop. Instead of preparing c3 and d4, allowing black to undouble the c-pawns with c takes d4, white can play d3, securing the center and preparing to develop the dark-squared bishop. After black plays bishop g7, white has a general plan of exchanging black's dark-squared bishop with ideas such as bishop e3, queen d2, and when appropriate, bishop h6. By trading the dark-squared bishops, white intends to weaken dark squares around the enemy king and also eliminate black's bishop pair. Playing bishop e3 immediately would blunder bishop takes b2, so white could consider playing knight c3 immediately, but an interesting option is to first play h3. This move helps secure the e3 square, as black cannot play knight f6, followed by knight g4. It prevents a potential pin against the knight, and it's not out of the question for white to later play g4 if a kingside attack demands it. Black typically continues with the natural developing move, knight f6, with an interesting knight maneuver in mind. After knight c3, black's knight makes a strange-looking but solid move, knight d7. The knight secures the weak c5 pawn and also prepares to support the central pawn thrust, e5. White continues to develop with bishop e3, adding more control to the center and preparing a queen-bishop battery with queen d2. Black now grabs a fair share of the center with e5. When after white castles the king to safety, in one Grandmaster encounter, Grandmaster Van Velde played queen e7, protecting the c5 pawn in order to complete an interesting knight maneuver. Grandmaster Svidler, playing white, responded with the typical queen d2, creating a queen-bishop battery and preparing bishop h6. Black continued with knight f8. The knight will be powerfully placed on e6, where it eyes key central squares, especially the d4 square. White continued with his plan by playing bishop h6, trying to eliminate the bishop pair and create dark-squared weaknesses around the enemy king. Black added protection to the center with f6, supporting e5 while revealing the queen's defense of the bishop. Instead of immediately capturing Black's bishop, as there's no rush to do so, White prepared an important pawn break with knight h4, clearing the way to open the f-file with f4, initiating a serious kingside attack. Black centralized the knight with knight e6, controlling the center and trying to discourage the f4 pawn break. Svidler patiently prepared his pieces for a kingside attack with knight e2, moving another piece to the kingside and preparing f4. In the game, White was able to soon trade dark-squared bishops, followed by opening up the f-file with f4. By trading the dark-squared bishops and opening up lines against the enemy king with f4, White was able to win an impressive attacking game. Instead of playing queen e7, in the 2018 World Championship match, Magnus Carlsen played b6, reinforcing the weak c5 pawn so Black's knight will no longer have to babysit that pawn. Carlsen provides us an instructive model with how to handle White's kingside attacking plans. His challenger, Grandmaster Fabiano Caruana, played knight h2, preparing to open up the f-file with f4, as well as bring the knight back into the action with knight g4. Carlsen responded with knight f8. Black prepares to complete his queenside development and anticipates a nice counter against White's kingside attack. The game continued with f4, forcing open the f-file when after e takes f4, capturing the pawn and activating Black's dark-squared bishop. White played rook takes f4, adding pressure against Black's pawn on f7. Black defended this weakness and centralized the bishop with bishop e6. White prepared the typical plan of exchanging dark-squared bishops with rook f2, clearing the diagonal for White's dark-squared bishop. The world champion prepared to counter this plan in instructive fashion with h6. White creates the typical queen-bishop battery with queen d2, when Magnus revealed the point behind his previous move by playing g5, countering White's queen-bishop battery on the c1 to h6 diagonal and also opening up a square for the knight to use in the future. White intensified the pressure on the kingside with rook a to f1. As things heat up on the kingside, Carlsen prepares to castle queenside with queen d6, centralizing the queen and eyeing White's kingside. White's wayward knight on h2 returns to the action with knight g4, dreaming of occupying the f6 square, when Black calmly responded with castling queenside, securing the king's safety and neutralizing White's dreams on the kingside. Black enjoys an active bishop pair and actually achieved a winning position before allowing a draw in this World Championship game. After bishop takes c6, Black also has the reasonable option to play b takes c6, capturing toward the center and opening up the b-file for a potential rook b8 move. In addition to doubling the pawns on the c-file, the other drawback to this move is isolating the pawn on a7. Both sides can continue with reasonable moves, including castling the king to safety, fianchettoing the bishop, and supporting the center with rook e1. If Black plays d6, then White is ready to play e5, trying to further damage Black's already compromised structure. If Black plays d takes e5, then Black is stuck with doubled, isolated pawns on the c-file. A strange-looking but instructive resource for Black is knight h6. This odd-looking move contains a strong plan. Black can weaken light squares around the king with f6 and knight f7, preparing to fight for the center. After the typical move c3, preparing d4, Black castles the king. White expands in the center with d4. Black undoubles the pawns with c takes d4, c takes d4, Black now strikes in the center with d5. If white doesn't advance the pawn, black can consider playing d takes e4, followed by knight f5, attacking the newly isolated d4 pawn. If white advances the pawn with e5, we see black's plan come to life with f6, counterattacking white's center. Since bishop g4 would help undermine white's center, white plays h3, preventing bishop g4, but allowing black to add more pressure against the center with knight f7. In one Grandmaster game, after white centralized the knight with knight c3, black decided to grab space on the king side with g5, when black can consider grabbing more space on the king side with f5, so black enjoys serious counterplay against white's king side. Preparing to play bishop b5 is not a universal anti-Sicilian strategy, as black can still play sound moves such as e6 or g6 on the second move, when bishop b5 is not a sensible choice, so this means you will need to be prepared to face these moves with another idea. But when black plays the common d6 or knight c6, inviting the open Sicilian with d4, if white prefers to focus on a slower-paced, often more positional struggle, then the anti-Sicilian choice of bishop b5 can be a good choice. From amateur to grandmaster, these lines are typically safe and reliable. If you enjoy playing e4, but want to avoid massive amounts of theory, then the anti-Sicilian with bishop b5 may be a reliable choice to suit your needs.